The Galactic Council Hall was bathed in an eerie, sterile light, as it always was during high-level meetings. Representatives from over 100 species sat in their levitating pods, arranged in a spiraling, towering structure that mimicked a colosseum. The air was heavy with anticipation. The Kaldorans were one of the most feared militaristic empires in the known galaxy, but today, their general, HFY, had requested to address the entire council. This was unheard of. The last time a Kaldoran general had spoken to the council, it had been a declaration of conquest, an announcement that they had absorbed another planet, another species, into their ever-growing empire. The council, largely powerless to stop them, had merely nodded along. But today was different. There were whispers of defeat, murmurs of a disaster on a scale that few could comprehend. HFY, towering at over 7 feet, was a terrifying figure. His gray-scaled skin, covered in scars from countless battles, shimmered under the lights. His clawed hands gripped the podium with barely concealed tension. His long, snout-like mouth opened to speak, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, teeth that had ripped into the flesh of enemies across the galaxy. But today, for the first time in memory, the general's eyes betrayed something alien, fear. He glanced at the council before beginning, his voice low, gravelly, and yet carrying a weight that silenced even the most defiant of representatives. "I come before you today," HFY began, "not as a victor, but as one who has witnessed the impossible." The chamber fell into stunned silence. The Kaldorans never admitted to anything less than absolute superiority. "Our empire," HFY continued, "has long dominated the stars. We have conquered systems, crushed rebellions, and bent entire civilizations to our will. And so, when we discovered a new species on the far edges of the Orion Arm, a species known as humans, we treated them as we would any other." A hologram flickered to life beside him. It displayed Earth, a small blue and green world spinning silently in the void. The image zoomed in on human cities, bustling metropolises, filled with the vibrancy of life. It was a fragile world, by all accounts, a single planet with no off-world colonies, no planetary defenses of note, and a primitive technological base. "They were weak," HFY continued, his voice rising slightly, "at least, by every measure we have ever used to assess a species' potential. They had no interstellar capabilities, no weapons capable of defending themselves from even a basic planetary bombardment. Their biology was unimpressive, small, soft-skinned, and fragile. When we first encountered them, we saw no threat. Our empire deemed them an easy conquest, a species ripe for subjugation." He activated another series of holograms, this time showing Kaldoran warships descending upon Earth. Vast shadowy ships blocked out the sun, casting long dark streaks over human cities. Plasma cannons fired from orbit, reducing entire city blocks to molten slag. "The first strike was flawless," HFY said. "As it always is. We destroyed their infrastructure, their military bases, and crippled their governments. We expected the humans to surrender, as so many species before them had. Our demands were simple: submission, servitude, and integration into the Kaldoran Empire." He paused, his scaled hand flexing over the podium. The chamber was silent, every representative hanging on his words. But they did not surrender. The hologram flickered, shifting to new images, human forces retaliating. At first, it was nothing more than scattered resistance. Small groups of soldiers, disorganized and poorly equipped, fighting against the Kaldoran invaders with outdated projectile weapons. Kaldoran soldiers, armored in advanced exosuits, towered over the humans. The skirmishes were laughable in comparison to what the Kaldorans were used to: guerrilla tactics, suicidal charges, desperation at its finest. "We thought their resistance was futile," HFY continued, his voice hardening. "Our weapons were far superior, our tactics unmatched. But then, something happened that we had never encountered before. Something we didn't understand." The holograms shifted again. This time, it showed human forces not just fighting back, but adapting. They scavenged Kaldoran technology, learned how to use alien weapons, and developed new tactics. Kaldoran supply lines were sabotaged, communication networks hacked, and entire battalions of elite Kaldoran soldiers were ambushed and destroyed by human guerrilla fighters. Human engineers repurposed Caldoran tech, using plasma rifles and power armor against their creators. They began to learn, HFY said, his tone filled with a grim reverence. At first, slowly. But soon, they were matching our soldiers in battle. They studied our movements, anticipated our attacks. We underestimated their intelligence, their capacity to adapt. We were not fighting a mindless swarm or a chaotic rebellion. We were fighting a species that had spent its entire history fighting each other, and they applied those lessons to us. The hologram zoomed in on a battlefield. Caldoran soldiers in full power armor were advancing across a ruined city, but the humans, instead of retreating, launched a surprise counterattack. Despite being outgunned and outmatched, they used hit-and-run tactics, improvised traps, and their sheer ferocity to dismantle the Caldoran forces. A single human with a scavenged plasma rifle took down a towering Caldoran mech, jumping onto its back, ripping open a panel, and firing into its exposed core. Their rage, HFY said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is their greatest weapon. The hologram shifted again, this time showing a human city in flames. The Caldorans had bombed it from orbit, reducing it to rubble. Bodies littered the streets, and yet, amid the devastation, human survivors rose from the ashes. They didn't flee. They didn't surrender. They rebuilt. They took what was left of their homes and turned it into war factories. Entire cities became armed camps, bristling with weapons. And the more we bombed them, the more defiant they became. HFY's face, usually expressionless, twisted with something unfamiliar. We did not understand their capacity for hate. Their ability to turn grief, loss, and destruction into fuel for war. With every city we destroyed, every civilian we killed, their resolve only strengthened. They weren't fighting for survival, they were fighting for vengeance. The chamber remained silent, but there was an undercurrent of unease rippling through the assembled representatives. The idea of a species driven by such primal emotions was unsettling. The next image was even more disturbing. It showed a Caldoran base on Earth, heavily fortified, with advanced technology and defenses that could hold off an army. Yet, human forces had breached it. They had tunneled underground, using explosives and guerrilla tactics to infiltrate the base. What followed was a brutal, hand-to-hand massacre, humans swarming over Caldoran soldiers, tearing them apart with whatever weapons they could find. Our losses became catastrophic, HFY admitted, his voice tight with anger and frustration. Entire battalions wiped out. Our forces, for the first time in our empire's history, began to fear the battlefield. They feared the humans. A video played, showing Caldoran soldiers retreating. Their elite warriors, who had once terrorized entire galaxies, were now fleeing from humans, who pursued them relentlessly, even into the depths of space. Human ships, hastily constructed from salvaged technology, began launching counterattacks in space, raiding Caldoran supply fleets and disabling their orbital bombardment platforms. In the final months of the war, HFY said, we attempted a full-scale invasion of Earth. We sent our largest fleet, armed with the most advanced weapons in our arsenal. It should have been an overwhelming force, but the humans, they had changed. The hologram showed the Caldoran fleet descending upon Earth, massive warships blotting out the sky. But something was wrong. The ships began to explode, one after another. Human fighters, repurposed from old civilian vessels, swarmed them, suicide runs combined with ingenious tactics that took advantage of every weakness they had learned. Entire Caldoran capital ships were boarded and captured. At that point, we knew, HFY said, his voice hollow. We could not win. Every day we remained on Earth, we were hemorrhaging resources, soldiers, and morale. They had become something we had never encountered, a force that would rather die than surrender. Their resistance was absolute, and their rage, it was boundless. The final image flickered into view, a lone human soldier standing atop a ruined Caldoran warship. His armor was scarred, his face blooded, but his eyes, those burning human eyes, stared defiantly into the camera. He held a plasma rifle in one hand and a makeshift flag in the other, a symbol of humanity's refusal to bow. For the first time in our history, HFY said quietly, we surrendered. We are retreating from Earth. We have signed a ceasefire with the human species. They are not to be underestimated. They are not to be provoked. He stepped down from the podium, but before leaving the chamber, he delivered one final message, his voice low and filled with dread. They are not like the others. They are a threat unlike any we have ever faced. And I fear that their conquest has only just begun. The Galactic Council sat in stunned silence as the Caldoran general walked away, leaving behind a warning that would echo across the stars. The humans had survived. And worse, they had thrived in the face of annihilation. They were no longer just a primitive species on a forgotten planet. They were a rising force, fueled by rage, and now, the galaxy would have to reckon with them.